God bless you. My name is Brother Iñigo Johnpaul, and I am a servant of the Pierced Hearts of Jesus and Mary. And I want to share with you how I got to this moment where I give my fiat to the Lord. I was born in Mexico in 1998 to a beautiful family, but a family that wasn't necessarily very Catholic. They were Catholic in their culture, and we would go to Mass on Sundays, and we would learn our basic prayers, but that was it. It was more of a cultural thing than something of the heart. But I grew up very, very happy with my mom and dad and my two siblings, my younger sister, who's also religious for our community, and my younger brother. In about 2004, when I was 6 years old, my parents had a very powerful conversion. They realized that the Lord wanted to love them. They had a personal encounter with the Lord, and they changed their lives. And for me, that was something very special. I don't know how to describe it. It impacted me a lot that my parents suddenly changed. After I knew that they had encountered the Lord through Our Lady, and I knew that they changed, and I could see that difference, and I could see that happiness in their hearts, and I just wanted to have that happiness. And that is when I truly started to seek the Lord. And even though I was a small child, and even before that, there was something in my heart that always wanted the Lord. Even when I would go to Mass on Sundays, my parents tell me that even when I was very little, I would imitate the priest in Mass. If he would open his arms, I would open my arms. If he would close his arms, I would close my arms. And I just had this profound sense in my heart of the Lord, and I just wanted to love him. A few years after their conversion, actually a year after their conversion in 2005, my parents met our community now, the servants of the Pierced Hearts of Jesus and Mary. They met our mother founders, Mother Adela, and some of the sisters during a Eucharistic Cenacle, which is an event we have every Friday where we have the Holy Mass, and then a time of Eucharistic adoration, of praise and worship with the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. And they met the sisters, and they totally fell in love with our charism. They discovered in our charism their home for their spiritual life. What is a charism but a path of holiness? And they discovered that this was the path of holiness that the Lord was calling them to live. So after a year or so of knowing them, they made a heroic choice that would change my life and the life of my family forever. They decided that they wanted to move to be closer to the sisters, as the sisters were based here in Miami. They wanted us, their children, to grow up with our mother founders, to grow up knowing the sisters, being close to them, being fed by their spiritual maternity. And they made that heroic choice. I have to say I wasn't very happy at first when they told me that we were moving. Don't get me wrong, I loved Mother and the sisters, but I also loved my friends in Mexico and my life that I had made. But once I got here, once I began to live my life here in Miami, there was such a change in my life, such a change, but because I was, closer to the Lord, closer to the sisters who were nourishing me, being born by them, at least, every week in the Cenacle, and then once a month, our spiritual formation that we have, as I was a young apostle of the Pierced Hearts, and we received formation every month, apart from all the other formation, the Cenacles and the different events that the sisters would have. So my life began to change for the better. And after a few months here in Miami, I remember that I would have dreams that my parents would say, we're going back to Mexico, and I would cry in the dream, and I was like, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to leave. And so my home became Miami. My home became being close to the sisters, my spiritual family at the moment. That's also when I encountered many of who are now my friends. Some of them are now even religious, who we were all little apostles of the Pierced Hearts. And we've grown together, and it's been a beautiful journey with my friends, who are more than friends because they're part of our spiritual family, so they're family. And so we grew up going to pilgrimages with Mother and the sisters. We grew up, coming to the convent to serve, to do different activities. And I moved when I was 9. So I grew up here in Miami. My teenage years were also here in Miami. After going to St. Agnes Academy for middle school, I went to Immaculada La Salle High School. And, it was during this time, this transition between middle school and high school, that I began to, question my relationship with the Lord. And I always loved the things of the Lord. I always loved learning about the things of the Lord, learning about the saints, going on pilgrimages and learning all these things, and I kind of became in school, the Jesus freak. But it was beautiful because I was able to share with my friends about the things of the Lord. And my friends would come to me when they needed some advice, or they needed some, or they wanted to know, what the church taught about something, even when I was in middle school. I remember I used to carry a catechism in my backpack, and would pull it out when they would ask a question or something. But anyway, as that transition between middle school and high school happened, I began to, my faith began to be very exterior, very, I would go to mass, I would altar serve. I've been altar serving my whole life, basically. And, so I would go to mass, altar serve, go to retreats, but it was very exterior. I wasn't living the faith with the heart. And it was my sophomore year of high school when there was a retreat, the class retreat. It wasn't like a mandatory retreat that you had to go to, it was optional. But I just didn't want to go. I felt, I'm good, I know everything that, in my own pride at the moment. And I thought, I know everything about the faith, and what am I gonna get from this retreat? So I really didn't want to go, but at the same time, because maybe, because I was that Jesus freak, I felt that I had to go to this retreat, it was who I was, if I didn't go to a retreat, like everybody would start asking questions. But I didn't want to go to a retreat. And then finally I found, an excuse to go to the retreat. I had to go to this other church event, an altar serve. So I remember I walked into the campus minister's office, and, and I also like theater very much. So I put on my theater persona, and I was like, the dramatics came out. And I was like, I'm so sad. I'm not going to be able to go to this retreat because I have this other, church thing. And, I can't say no, to this church thing, and and all this, dramatics with that. And I remember the campus minister just looked at me and she said, well, why don't you just come to a retreat after the event? And I was like, well, yes, I guess, yes, yeah, yes, that's, I'm so glad you thought about that. That's great. Oh, can I do that? Oh my goodness, yes, But inside I was like, I didn't. Okay, I guess I have to go now. So I ended up going to the church event, and then I was going to the retreat, and I remember on the car ride to the retreat, I just thought to myself, looking back, I think it was the Lord preparing my heart, but I just thought to myself, I'm going to a retreat. I'm not getting out of it now. Let me just open my heart and see what the Lord wants to do. And I got to a retreat, and like 30 minutes after I got there, we went to the makeshift chapel where we were going to have Eucharistic adoration. I remember I sat towards the back, and I was kneeling down, and they exposed the Lord, and I did what I was always taught to do from when I was a child, to kneel down and raise my hands. And there was something different that time. When I looked at the Lord in the Eucharist, I knew that he was there, and I knew that he loved me. And that was when I had my personal encounter with him. I like to use this analogy that, before this moment, it was like as if, I followed the Lord on Instagram, or I had read about him, but I had never actually met him. And it was in that moment where I met him face to face, where I encountered him, where I had that encounter with him and with his love. And I remember I started crying and laughing at the same time. And I was like, in the midst of all of this, you think there's thousands of things coming into your mind, and I was thinking, Lord, thank you for letting me be in the back, because if people were seeing me, like, they would think I was crazy, laughing and crying at the same time. So after this encounter, my life began to change, because I discovered that the Lord loved me, and that changes everything. So So I began to have this personal relationship with him. And a few years later, during my junior year of high school, I began to sense that maybe the Lord was calling me to something more. That maybe the Lord wanted me to be his. And I wasn't sure. I mean, I knew what it meant, theologically, intellectually, but I was like discovering what it meant in my heart. And the summer before my senior year of high school, I had the great gift of going to World Youth Day in Poland in 2016. And I went with my mother foundress and with some of the sisters and with a lot of youth, a lot of whom are now also in the community. And during this World Youth Day, I remember it was so powerful coming to a deeper understanding of the love that God has for each one of us. And, the theme of World Youth Day was love. And I remember we sang this song, for as long as I shall live, I will testify to love. And I just remember the first time we sang the song, we were in the chapel of Niepocalanao, the city of the Immaculate, where St. Maximilian would celebrate Mass. I remember we were all just together and singing, testifying to love. And I was like, what is this? This is like heaven. And it was just so beautiful. And the whole pilgrimage, the Lord was preparing my heart, speaking to my heart about love. And he also began to place a seed in my heart. And I began to sense through a friend as we were sharing, what would happen if our mother foundress would found a male branch of the community. Of course, at that time, the male branch didn't exist. And we were kind of joking around about it, like, oh yeah, we would join. But in between the joking, in between the laughing about it, there was something there tugging my heart, and something that my heart recognized. Like, it's hard to explain, but there was something in my heart that knew. Now I can say it like this, right? But that knew that was what I was called to. So I began praying about it, and during this pilgrimage, just praying about it. Lord, is this what you want for my life? And I remember towards the end of the pilgrimage, I was in the sanctuary of Calvario, which is where St. Johnpaul II would go throughout his whole life. He went to pray. He went there first with his father, but then also when he was the bishop of Krakow, he would go there to go and pray and present to Our Lady all of his intentions, the intentions of their diocese. And I was there, and I remember I was praying, and I said, Lord, if this is what you want for my life, if you want me to be a servant, a member of the male branch of the sisters, let me see a pelican. Now you may think, like, why a pelican? Well, a pelican is used in Christian iconography to depict Christ, because the mother pelican pierces her own heart to allow her children who are starving to have food. So she gives her life so that her children may have life. And it is a very particular sign in the history of our community, because it was through the pelican that the Lord first spoke to our mother foundress when Our Lady asked her to make an exchange of hearts and told her, allow your heart to be pierced so that others may have life. Others, which is all of us. So I asked, Lord, if this is what you want for my life, let me see a pelican. So I began, looking all over the church, like looking even like under the pews. I like, now I think back and I was like, yeah, I definitely, it's definitely written in my heart, because I really wanted to see a pelican. But I looked everywhere and I was like, there's no pelican, so I was like, well, Lord, I guess you'll keep speaking. Maybe I'm not ready to receive this confirmation. And, so I remember I left the chapel where I was and into the main church, and I kept looking, and I was like, no. And then I started going outside to leave, and I saw this door, and I was like, oh, what is this? I thought maybe it was a sacristy, and since I've always altar served and I love the liturgy, I was like, oh, maybe I can, sneak in and see what there is. And I remember I went in, and it was the chapel that is what is called like the monastery choir. It's where the monks would sit in like a square, you could say. They would sit, two like this and then one like that, and there was the altar on this side. But I entered, and it's where the monks would pray the liturgy of the hours. And I remember I entered, but the altar's on my left, so I'm looking at all the seats where the monks would sit, and suddenly I turn around and I look at the altar, and on top of the altar there's a tabernacle, and the tabernacle is the image of a pelican, piercing her heart to give life to the children. In that moment, there was an overflowing of joy in my heart. And I just knelt down there and I said, Lord, I give you my life. So I came back from that trip super excited. You know, I spoke to our mother foundress, and she said, well, you still have one more year of high school. Let's continue to pray and see if this is what the Lord is asking. But I was like on fire about this. I was like, yes, I'm gonna be a servant, and and I was so happy and so excited. But as time began to pass, I started my senior year of high school. Many activities. I got involved in so many things, good things, things of the Lord. But I didn't take the time to discern that, to continue to discern that confirmation, that call that I had been feeling in my heart. So as time went on, I began to stop thinking about it less and less, and towards the end of high school, I thought, maybe this is not what the Lord is calling me to. So I finished high school. I began working at my home parish. I began, I began doing my life, going to college. I was in a relationship at that time, a beautiful Catholic relationship, and I just started continuing going through life, and I just kind of pushed that to the back, and as I continued, I started feeling, maybe the Lord isn't calling me to be a priest, and that kept being confirmed in my heart. The Lord isn't calling me to be a priest, so I thought that meant, okay, if the Lord isn't calling me to be a priest, then I'm called to be married. And sometime after that, after I had graduated and I had been working for a while, one day, I told our mother foundress, I told her, Mother, I don't think I'm being called to be a priest because of this and that, because I want to teach, and I want to preach and give talks and be like a Catholic speaker or something, but I don't feel that the Lord is calling me to the priestly ministry. And I remember she just was smiling and looking at me, and she said, well, that's beautiful, but have you ever thought about becoming a brother? I was like, what? I had heard of brothers before, but I hadn't thought about it, and she was like, yeah, because everything you're describing to me is what it means to be a religious brother. I was like, oh, really? Huh. But I kind of, I was at a point at that time where I was like, no, but I have my life made, and that's it, so, but I remember I would sometimes say, when people would come up to me and say, oh, but, you should be a priest. And I said, no. If the Lord would ever call me, he would call me to be a brother, not a priest. But, I would just say that. But as life kept happening, there got to a point where I remember a year and a half after graduating from high school, I remember I got to a point, and I remember this moment particularly where I thought, wow, I have everything that I've ever wanted in my life. I had the job of my dreams. I had just gotten a job at my old high school, helping with the drama program and potentially to start helping in campus ministry, which is what I had always wanted to do. I was in a beautiful Catholic relationship. I was, having a great life with my family. And I thought, this is it. The Lord has given me everything that I've ever wanted to. And a few months after that, I had the gift to go on another pilgrimage, this time to the Marian shrines in France, Spain, and Portugal. And during that whole trip, the Lord was preparing my heart for something big that was going to happen. Of course, I didn't know this, but the Lord prepared my heart. And one of the last days of that trip, I was in Fatima, in the sanctuary of Our Lady, and I was kneeling down, and this is something I didn't remember actually, but I saw a picture of that moment that somebody took recently, and I was actually kneeling down very close to Mother. But I remember I was looking at my Blessed Mother, and I just felt something in my heart. I felt her speak to me, and she said, Iñigo, you have everything you've ever wanted in your life. You have everything that you've ever asked, my son. And you're happy. And my mind was like, yeah, I am happy. But then she said something that pierced me. She said, I want to remind you. I want to remind you of the plan that the Lord, my son, has for your life. The plan that he shared with you some years ago. Yes, you're happy now. But it's nothing compared to the happiness that you will live when you follow his will for your life. And that pierced my heart. And I knew it was true. And I just remember just thinking that moment, I just realized what my life would be if I gave it all to him. If I became a religious brother. And I just felt, I thought I was so happy in that moment. And before living my life with what I was doing. But in that moment where I saw in my heart what it would be like to be a religious brother, I experienced a happiness so much greater than that. And that's when I knew that I had to leave it all and give my life to him. And I think the Lord kept knocking the door of my heart for so long. And at one point he said, Mother, I think you have to talk to him because I'm trying here. But it was through his mother, it was through Our Lady of Fatima that my heart was opened to the possibility again. So I remember that same evening I spoke to Mother and I said, Mother, I'm ready. And also by this point, Father Joseph Mary began the process of the community. He had been 1 year in the community, so the doors were now open for the community to begin. So everything was there. So I came back to Miami, and I left everything behind. And a few months later, I entered the community. And what I can say is now that I've lived for 3 years my religious life, what I can say is that it's true. I was happy before, but it's nothing compared to the happiness that I have now. And I'm just so grateful to the Lord for everything he has done, for the parents that he gave me, the siblings that he gave me, the family that he gave me, and because of that fundamental choice that they made to move here to Miami, for me to grow up with Mother and the sisters. The gifts that I've had throughout my life, and above all, the gratitude that I have to the Lord and Our Lady for my vocation. And I think, when I finally entered, I discovered what I already knew in my heart, what was already written in my heart, that this charism was my home. That this call that I have as a brother to be the living image and presence of the heart, person, and mission of Christ, formed in the school of Our Lady, which is our fourth vow as the male branch. That was my life. That was what was written in my heart all those years ago. That I was made for this charism that has, as our 4 pillars, that we're Eucharistic, we're Marian, we're open to the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and we serve and live in the heart of the church. This is what my heart desired. This is what my heart was created for. So 3 years later, what I can say is that when you follow the will of the Lord for your life, yes, there are difficulties, there can be sufferings, moments of doubt, but in the end, there's a profound joy in your heart because you're doing what you were created for. So never be afraid. Never be afraid to follow the plan of the Lord for your life. Never be afraid to say yes to him, to love him. And know that he's the only one that can satisfy the deepest recesses of our hearts in whatever vocation we are called to. But he's the only one that can truly satisfy us. As St. Augustine, one of my patron saints, would say famously, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. I can say, since I said yes to him, my heart has found rest in the Lord. God bless you.